The wind, a razor across the high chaparral, had flayed the last vestiges of hope from her hours ago. Now, there was only the grit of sand between her teeth, the throb of her swollen belly, and the fire in her feet. Each step was a fresh agony, rock and thorn tearing at flesh already blooded and blistered raw. 3 days. Or was it 4? Time had dissolved into a haze of sun-scorched days and star-pricked, frigid nights. The white dress, once perhaps a symbol of a promise, now hung in filthy tatters around her, a mockery of purity, clinging to her like a shroud. She was Ilara, though the name felt like a borrowed thing, a whisper from a life that had shattered behind her. The child within her, a persistent, rolling ache, was the only truth she carried. She pressed a hand to her stomach, a gesture of fierce, desperate protection. Ahead, a pinprick of light, so faint it could have been a cruel trick of her exhausted mind, flickered in the vast, indifferent darkness. It was the only reason her legs still moved, one foot dragging before the other, a rhythm of pure, animalistic will. The memory of a voice, smooth as oiled steel yet cold as a winter river, echoed in the canyons of her mind. "You are mine. You will not leave," or a shadow of a hand, large and possessive, reaching. She stumbled, a sharp cry tearing from her throat as a fresh spike of pain shot up her leg. The light. It had to be real. It was the last ember in a world gone cold. The land offered no comfort, only jagged silhouettes against a bruised twilight sky. The air tasted of dust and despair. Each gust seemed to whisper of pursuit, of failure. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. Her vision swam. The light. It was closer now, a small, square glow, impossibly warm in the desolation. A cabin. Shelter. Or another trap. But the alternative was the open dark, the teeth of the wild, the cold that seeped into bones and froze the heart. She fixed her gaze on it, a drowning sailor sighting land. One more step. And another. The ground beneath her softened slightly, no longer sheer rock but packed earth. A path? Hope, a fragile moth, fluttered in her chest. Then, the world tilted, the light fracturing into 1,000 glittering shards. Her knees buckled. Darkness rushed in, swift and absolute. She fell, not with a crash, but a slow, sighing surrender, the unforgiving earth rising to meet her. The last sensation was the rough scratch of dirt against her cheek, the scent of pine and something else, something like wood smoke, a ghost of comfort before oblivion. He found her there, a pale crumpled heap at the edge of his clearing, where the wild grass gave way to the tended earth around his cabin. Silas had seen death in many forms, the quiet fading of his Martha, the stark finality of a winter-starved deer. This girl, woman, was close to it. Her face, even in the encroaching gloom, was waxy, her lips cracked and tinged with blue. He saw the swell of her belly, the ruin of her feet, the remnants of a dress too fine for this wilderness. He stood for a long moment, a monolith against the darkening sky, his face carved from weathered oak, revealing nothing. The wind tugged at his worn coat, whispering its mournful secrets. He was a man of few words, his life pared down to essentials, the cabin, the small garden, the memory of a love that still ached like a phantom limb. He had not sought company, had actively shunned it for years. But this was different. This was a life, 2 lives, washed up on his solitary shore. He knelt, his movement slow, deliberate. His large, calloused hand, surprisingly gentle, brushed the matted hair from her forehead. A flicker of her eyelids, a breath so shallow it was barely visible. He looked towards the vast, swallowing darkness from which she had emerged, then back at her fragile form. There was no question of turning her away. Such an act would be a betrayal of something deep within him, something Martha would have understood. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the encroaching night, he carefully, tenderly, gathered her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, a bird with broken wings. He carried her towards the golden light of his cabin, a sanctuary carved from silence and sorrow, now, perhaps, something more. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open with his shoulder, the warm, familiar scent of wood smoke and dried herbs washing over them. Silas laid her gently on the narrow cot in the corner, the one that had once been Martha's when fevers took her. He moved with an economy born of long practice in solitude, lighting another lamp, stoking the fire in the small stone hearth until it cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn wooden walls. The cabin was small, meticulously kept. A single shelf held a few worn books. On the mantel, beside a chipped tin cup, sat a small, intricately carved wooden wren, its head tilted as if listening. Ilara drifted in and out of a painful haze. She felt the warmth first, a blessed relief seeping into her chilled bones. Then, awareness of gentle hands. Her torn dress was being eased away from her shoulders, replaced by something soft and woolen, smelling faintly of cedar. She tried to pull away, a primal fear surging, but she had no strength. A voice, low and calm, rumbled near her ear, not the voice from her nightmares, but something different, steady as bedrock. "Easy now. You're safe? The word was alien. She forced her eyes open, saw a silhouette against the firelight, a man, broad-shouldered, his features obscured. Terror seized her. Another cage. Another master. But his hands, as they worked, were not cruel. He was tending to her feet, the cool wetness of a cloth, the sting of some herbal balm, but even the pain was a distant thing, wrapped in layers of exhaustion. He did not speak again, simply worked with quiet efficiency, cleaning the grime and blood, applying a salve that smelled of pine needles and something else, something healing. He bound them carefully in strips of clean linen. She watched him through slitted, wary eyes. His face, when he finally looked up, was weathered, etched with lines of sun and sorrow, his eyes a clear, steady grey, like a winter sky. There was no avarice there, no visible malice. Only a deep, quiet weariness, and perhaps, a flicker of something akin to pity. He brought her water in a tin cup, holding it to her lips. She drank, parched beyond imagining. Then, a thin broth, warm and savoury. She managed a few sips before sleep, heavy and irresistible, claimed her again. When she woke, pale dawn was seeping through the single small window. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The scent of wood smoke, the unfamiliar weight of a thick wool blanket. Then memory returned, the endless walking, the collapse, the man. She was lying on the cot, her feet bandaged, throbbing dully but no longer on fire. The cabin was quiet. He was gone. Panic flared briefly, then subsided. A small pot of something warm sat on the hearth, and beside her cot, on a low stool, was a pair of women's boots. They were old, well-worn, but sturdy, the leather softened with age and care, the soles thick. Someone had recently oiled them. They looked like they might fit. She stared at them, a lump forming in her throat. It was such a simple offering, yet it spoke volumes. She pushed herself up, wincing. Her body ached, but the sharpest edges of her suffering had been blunted. She looked around the small space. It was a man's home, sparse and functional, yet there were traces of a woman's touch, a faded quilt draped over a wooden chest, the tiny carved wren, a small, neatly stitched sampler on the wall with the words "Love endures," a widower, then. A man acquainted with loss. She felt a sliver of something other than fear. Caution, yes, but also a hesitant curiosity. The door opened, and Silas entered, carrying an armful of firewood. He stopped when he saw her awake, a slight, almost imperceptible pause. He nodded once, a gesture that was neither friendly nor unfriendly, merely an acknowledgement. He set down the wood, his movements unhurried. "There's porridge on the hearth," he said, his voice a low burr. He didn't press her, didn't ask questions, simply stated a fact and went about his morning chores, checking the snares outside, tending the small goat tethered near the woodpile. Ilara watched him, her gaze unwavering. He moved with a quiet competence, a man at peace in his harsh surroundings. The silence in the cabin was not empty, but full of unspoken things. Later, she ate the porridge. It was plain, but nourishing. The boots remained on the stool, a silent invitation, a promise of protection for her ruined feet. Days bled into a week, then 2. A quiet rhythm established itself within the small cabin, dictated by the rising and setting of the sun, the needs of the body, the silent accord between two strangers thrown together by fate. Ilara's physical strength slowly returned. The deep wounds on her feet healed under Silas's continued, practical care, leaving behind tender pink scars, a testament to her ordeal. She began to wear the boots he had left for her. They fit as if made for her, a comforting weight, a barrier against the harsh earth. She still moved with caution, her trust a fragile seed, but the terror that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a watchful weariness. She helped with small tasks, shelling dried beans into an earthen bowl, stirring the pot that simmered over the fire, mending a tear in one of Silas's shirts with neat, tiny stitches her mother had taught her long ago. These shared activities were performed in near silence, yet they wove a delicate thread of connection between them. Silas spoke little, his words reserved for necessity, but his actions were a language she was beginning to understand. He left her fresh water each morning. He ensured there was always wood for the fire. He would sometimes return from his trapping lines with a rabbit or a brace of birds, and they would prepare the meal together, a silent, synchronized dance of domesticity. He never asked about her past, about the tattered white dress she kept folded beneath her thin mattress, or the haunted look that sometimes shadowed her eyes. He simply accepted her presence, a fact, like the mountains that ringed their small valley. One night, the memories came for her, unbidden and cruel. She was back in the ornate room, the air thick with expensive perfume and unspoken menace. Jonas's face, handsome in a predatory way, loomed over her, his eyes cold chips of obsidian. "You thought you could defy me? You belong to me, Ilara." Body and soul his hand, heavy with rings, clamped onto her arm, his grip bruising. She cried out in her sleep, a strangled sound of pure terror, thrashing against the confines of the cot. She woke with a gasp, heart hammering, the phantom pain of his grip still on her skin. The cabin was dark, save for the dying embers in the hearth. She could hear Silas's steady breathing from his own makeshift bed on the floor across the room. He hadn't stirred. Or if he had, he gave no sign. Shivering, she drew the rough blanket tighter. The child within her moved, a comforting pressure, a reminder of why she had run, why she had to keep running, or find a place safe enough to stop. The next morning, Silas said nothing of her outcry, but he left a cup of chamomile tea, still warm, beside her cot before he went out. She looked at it, then at his broad, retreating back. He had heard. And he had understood her need for solace, for privacy. His quiet empathy was a balm. Sometimes, she would see him pause in his work, his gaze fixed on the small wooden wren on the mantelpiece. A flicker of profound sorrow would cross his face, so fleeting she might have imagined it, before his usual stoic mask settled back into place. Martha. The name was unspoken, but it hung in the air, a gentle ghost. He, too, knew the landscape of loss. One afternoon, as a chill autumn wind howled outside, rattling the shutters, Ilara sat by the fire, her hands busy mending a patch on the knee of Silas's trousers. The baby was active, a series of distinct nudges and rolls. Silas sat opposite, sharpening his hunting knife, the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone a counterpoint to the wind's mournful song. The silence stretched, comfortable now, familiar. She finished her stitching, bit off the thread. "The wind is angry today," she said, her voice soft, a little rusty from disuse. It was the most she had offered by way of conversation. Silas paused, his grey eyes meeting hers. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It often is, in these mountains." But it passes. He returned to his whetstone. The simple exchange felt significant, a small bridge built across the chasm of their separate griefs. The cabin, once a mere refuge from the elements, was slowly, imperceptibly, becoming something more. A haven. But the fear, though diminished, still lingered, a cold serpent crawled in the pit of her stomach. The world outside was vast, and Jonas was not a man to be easily thwarted. The fragile piece of their shared solitude was always under threat, a flickering candle in a vast darkness. Ilara knew this, felt it in the marrow of her bones. Jonas was a patient predator, and his pride, once wounded, would fester into a relentless pursuit. She found herself scanning the horizon whenever she stepped outside the cabin, her ears straining for the sound of hoofbeats on the distant trail, her heart a trapped bird at any unexpected noise. Silas, too, seemed more watchful, though his demeanor remained as placid as a mountain lake on a calm day. He spent more time reinforcing the cabin's defenses, checking the simple alarm he'd rigged, a series of taut wires connected to tin cans near the perimeter of the clearing. He cleaned his old rifle with a quiet intensity that spoke of preparedness. One crisp morning, as the sun painted the eastern peaks in hues of rose and gold, Ilara was drawing water from the well when she saw it, a plume of dust rising in the distance, too deliberate, too sustained to be caused by wind or wandering game. Riders. Her blood ran cold. She dropped the bucket, water splashing unheeded onto the parched earth, and stumbled back towards the cabin, her hand flying to her throat. "Silas!" Her voice was a raw whisper, choked with returning terror. He was at the door in an instant, his expression grim. He followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing. "Inside, Ilara." "Stay away from the window." His tone was low, urgent, but calm. He took the rifle from its pegs above the mantel, checked the load with swift, practiced movements. The small cabin suddenly felt like a fortress under siege. The air grew thick with unspoken dread. Ilara retreated to the darkest corner, her hands clasped over her burgeoning belly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She could hear the distinct sound of horses now, the jingle of harness, the low murmur of male voices. They were close. Too close. The wooden wren on the mantel seemed to watch her with its unblinking, carved eyes. Love endures. But could it endure this? Could it stand against the raw, brutal force of Jonas's malice? The lead rider reined in his horse just beyond the edge of Silas's small, carefully tended garden, his mount snorting and stamping impatiently. Jonas! Even from the shadowed interior of the cabin, Ilara recognized his arrogant posture, the expensive cut of his dark coat, the cruel set of his jaw. He was flanked by two other men, rough-looking, their eyes cold and assessing as they scanned the humble dwelling. Silas stepped out onto the porch, the rifle held loosely, almost casually, in the crook of his arm. He stood there, a bulwark of quiet strength, his weathered face unreadable. "This is private property," Silas said, his voice even, carrying clearly in the still morning air. "State your business and be on your way." Jonas dismounted with a fluid, almost insolent grace, tossing his reins to one of his men. He swaggered forward a few paces, his lips curling into a sneer as he took in Silas's worn clothing, the rustic simplicity of the cabin. "My business is with the woman you're harboring, old man. The runaway." "My wife." His voice was like gravel over velvet, a chilling sound that made Ilara's skin crawl. "Wife." The word was a brand, a claim of ownership. Silas didn't flinch. "There's no one here by that description." "You're mistaken." Jonas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, I'm not mistaken. She's here. I can smell her fear. Ilara! Come out. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." His voice rose, cracking like a whip. Ilara pressed herself further into the shadows, her body trembling uncontrollably. She could hear her child, fluttering within, as if sensing the danger. "She is not here," Silas repeated, his voice hardening, his grip tightening almost imperceptibly on the rifle. "And even if she were, she'd not be going anywhere with you. Now, I suggest you leave." "Brave words, for a man alone," Jonas mocked, his eyes glinting. He took another step forward. "She is my property. Stolen goods. And I always reclaim what is mine." He gestured to his men. "Search the cabin." The two men started to dismount, their expressions eager. Silas brought the rifle up, not aggressively, but with a finality that brooked no argument. The muzzle was steady, aimed not at Jonas, but at a point between his two advancing henchmen. "I wouldn't," he said softly. "This is her home now. She is under my protection." The air crackled with tension. Jonas's face darkened with rage. He was not used to being defied, especially not by someone he clearly considered beneath him. "You would die for her, old man? A woman who means nothing to you?" Silas's gaze was unwavering. "Some things are worth more than a quiet life." For a long moment, no one moved. The wind whispered through the pines, a mournful sigh. Ilara, watching through a crack in the shutters, felt a surge of something fierce and protective. This man, this stranger, was willing to stand against the storm for her. She saw one of Jonas's men reach subtly for the pistol at his hip. Before he could draw, before Jonas could utter another word, Silas moved. It wasn't a dramatic action, but one of swift, brutal efficiency. The butt of the rifle came up in a short, sharp arc, connecting with the reaching man's wrist with a sickening crunch. The man howled, clutching his injured hand. The second henchman froze, his eyes wide. Jonas stared, momentarily stunned by the sudden, decisive violence from the quiet farmer. "I will say this only once more," Silas stated, his voice like chips of granite. "Leave. And do not return." His eyes, cold as the mountain peaks, locked onto Jonas. There was no fear in them, only an implacable resolve. Jonas, for all his bluster, was not a fool. He saw the unwavering determination in Silas's stance, the dangerous capability. He also saw that his men were now hesitant, one clearly injured. His handsome face twisted into an ugly mask of fury. "This isn't over, old man," he snarled, backing away slowly. "She will never be free of me. I'll find another way." He remounted, his movements jerky with anger. He cast one last venomous glare at the cabin, then at Silas. "You'll regret this day." With a final curse, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his men scrambling to follow, the plume of dust rising once more, this time in retreat. Silas stood watching until they were out of sight, the rifle still ready. Only then did he lower it, the tension slowly ebbing from his shoulders. He turned and looked towards the cabin door, his expression unreadable, but Ilara thought she saw a profound weariness in his eyes, and something else, a quiet, resolute strength that filled her with a fragile, burgeoning hope. The dust settled. The sound of retreating hoofbeats faded into the vast silence of the wilderness. Silas remained on the porch for a long time, the rifle still in his hand, his gaze fixed on the empty trail. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows, but the chill of the encounter lingered in the air. Ilara slowly emerged from the cabin, her legs unsteady, her heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at Silas's broad back, the set of his shoulders, and a wave of gratitude so profound it stole her breath washed over her. He had stood as a shield between her and the darkness of her past. He had called this place her home. When he finally turned, his face was etched with fatigue, but his eyes were clear. He offered her a small, almost imperceptible nod. "They're gone," he said, his voice rough. "For now he'll come back," Ilara whispered, the fear still a cold knot in her stomach. Jonas was not one to accept defeat. "Perhaps," Silas conceded. He leaned the rifle against the cabin wall. "But we'll be ready." He didn't offer false platitudes or easy reassurances. His promise was in his steady gaze, in the quiet strength that emanated from him. In the days that followed, a subtle shift occurred. The immediate threat had passed, but its shadow spurred them to action. Silas methodically checked and strengthened every part of the cabin, reinforcing the door, securing the shutters more firmly. Ilara, despite her advancing pregnancy, helped where she could, her earlier timidity replaced by a quiet resolve. She learned to load the old rifle, her hand surprisingly steady. She was no longer just a victim, she was a defender of this small patch of earth that had become her sanctuary. The child within her grew, a constant, tangible reminder of the future, a future Silas was helping her fight for. The unspoken bond between them deepened, forged in shared danger and quiet resilience. Then, one cold night, as a premature snow began to fall, soft and silent, her time came. It began with a dull ache in her lower back, a tightening in her belly that was different, more insistent. Fear mingled with a primal anticipation. Silas, seeing her face pale, her breath catch, knew. He moved with the same calm efficiency he brought to every task, preparing clean linens, hot water, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her pain. The labor was long and arduous. In the small, lamplit cabin, with the wind howling outside like a hungry wolf, Ilara fought her battle, Silas her unwavering support. He held her hand, wiped her brow, spoke words of encouragement, his voice a low, soothing rumble. And then, as the first grey light of dawn touched the snow-covered world, a new cry joined the sound of the wind, strong, lusty, full of life. A daughter. Ilara lay back, exhausted but euphoric, tears streaming down her face as Silas gently placed the swaddled infant in her arms. The baby was perfect, tiny fingers curled, a fuzz of dark hair on her small head. Silas looked at the child, then at Ilara, and for the first time, she saw an unguarded softness in his eyes, a flicker of warmth that transformed his stern features. "She's beautiful, Ilara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Like her mother in that moment, the last vestiges of Ilara's fear seemed to melt away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. Jonas's shadow still lurked, perhaps, but it felt distant, less powerful than the fierce love that filled the small cabin. She looked at Silas, this quiet, solitary man who had taken in a desperate stranger, given her shelter, protected her, and now shared in the miracle of new life. He was no longer just a guardian, he was family. He had given her more than a roof over her head, he had given her a home, a place where her child could be born into safety and love. The tattered remnants of her old life, the white dress she had hidden away, no longer held any power. She had the boots he had given her, sturdy and dependable, ready for whatever path lay ahead. But looking at Silas, at her daughter nestled in her arms, she knew she wasn't walking any further. She was already where she belonged. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the land in pristine white, a symbol of new beginnings. Inside the warm cabin, a new family had been forged, two broken souls and a tiny, perfect new life, finding solace and strength in each other, a testament to the enduring power of kindness in a harsh world. The seasons turned, marked by the budding of wildflowers in the meadow, the deepening green of the forest, the eventual blaze of autumn colors on the mountainsides. The child, named Hope by Ilara in a moment of quiet certainty, thrived under their shared care. Silas, a man long accustomed to solitude, found his life irrevocably changed, filled with the gurgles and cries and, eventually, the infectious laughter of a small child. He carved her a tiny wooden lamb to match his Martha's wren, his calloused fingers surprisingly deft. Ilara watched him with hope, a tenderness blooming in her heart that was new and precious. The fear of Jonas's return never entirely vanished, but it receded into the background, a distant shadow in their sunlit present. They lived simply, their days filled with the rhythms of the land and the needs of a growing child. The cabin, once a mere shelter, resonated with a warmth and life it hadn't known for many years. One evening, as the first stars pricked the twilight sky, Ilara sat on the porch, Hope asleep in her arms, Silas beside her, whittling a piece of wood. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. "I never thought I would find peace again," Ilara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. After everything, Silas paused in his carving, his gaze distant for a moment, perhaps remembering his own sorrows. Then he looked at her, his grey eyes gentle. "Peace isn't always found, Ilara. Sometimes, it's built." One kindness, one shared burden, one small joy at a time. He reached out a hand, not to touch her, but to gently stroke Hope's downy hair. "You brought life back to this place." To me his words, so rare and deeply felt, settled in her heart like a warm stone. The wounded wanderer had found her sanctuary, not in a grand fortress, but in the steadfast heart of a stoic guardian, and in the love for the child they both cherished. The past was a scar, but it no longer defined her. Her future was here, in this small cabin, under the vast, watchful sky, with this unconventional, precious family. They had faced the embodiment of cruelty and, with quiet courage and unwavering compassion, they had overcome. Their story was a testament, whispered on the mountain wind, that even in the deepest darkness, the smallest light of human connection can spark a new dawn. We've walked a long road with Ilara, haven't we? From the depths of despair to the quiet peace of a found family. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many Silases are out there, ready to offer shelter, and how many Ilaras are searching for that one safe harbor? What does it truly take to build a home, not just of wood and stone, but of trust and belonging? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If their story touched your heart, please subscribe for more tales of courage and connection. And perhaps, click on the next video to see where another journey might lead. What act of kindness, no matter how small, could you offer someone today that might change the course of their story?